Let us speak of Dr. Layman and his Long Live Culture, Culture is Dead video. So some of his premises are a bit strange, I think you could say. So at the beginning of it, he goes on to point out that it's become much more capable, much more possible for independent individuals to actually communicate important information that was previously the sole domain of giant corporations, oftentimes news corporations. And I think he draws some bad conclusions from this. So, for example, he'll mention that it's now possible to look up on Google and find information about the war in Syria. But I would have to ask you, out of those stories that you will find at the top of Google, within the first 10 results, within the first 20 results, how many of them are by independent journalists? How many of them are by companies like Reuters, who then resell information to other companies like CNN? A lot of the information that's going to be on the first search page of Google when you're searching for information about the Syrian war is not going to be by individuals. If you think there is a great cultural shift here, that is not happening yet when it comes to where we get the majority of our news from. And a bigger problem on top of this is accountability. So even if we were at a point in time where when you searched for information on the Syrian war, that Sargon of Akkad was the first person that popped up, does he have the same accountability that large news corporations have? I would argue not necessarily. He has accountability to his audience, but it pretty much ends there. As long as his audience lets him get away with it, that is where his accountability can end. That doesn't mean that's where it does end for it. It just means that's where it can end, and that's where you get these there's this play in the system then. Because as mentioned before, people can break the rules of a system and still get away with it. Take, for example, Twitter. Sargon of Akkad has always bemoaned the fact that he gets banned from Twitter or suspended on occasion because he broke those rules. And you say, what about these other people who also broke the rules? Well, you still don't simply understand, apparently, that those other people were breaking the rules, but nobody really noticed or cared. And that is the distinction. So when we're talking about, news corporations like CNN, they have a much greater responsibility to be factually accurate in their reporting of news than, for example, Sargon would. In addition to this, it becomes much more easy to spread information or introduce misinformation into the system when you don't have a single individual that can be held responsible for it. So in other words, somebody writes a story in the New York Times, you know their name, you can trace that down and find out their professional history and determine whether or not they are like a reputable individual, whereas you find anonymous tips on sites like 4chan or Reddit. How can you exactly hold a lot of those accounts to task if they spread an amount of information that causes a great societal shift, especially if it ends up harming people? So I don't think it's necessarily it's not a universal good that we are moving towards a less centralized news distribution platform. I think it is good, though, to have some slack in the system, though. I think there is certainly a time and a place for those people. I just be cautious about this wholehearted embracing of that kind of information. Obviously, what I'm doing right here is independent analysis of a critique. It's a critique of somebody else's work, but it's not done by like film critics that we're used to, for example. In addition to this, Dr. Layman gets into some other territory that I find questionable. So another topic he mentions is crowdsourcing. So in other words, we now have films, we now have music, we now have all these kinds of entertainment and art that have actually been paid for by the people who enjoy it, rather than perhaps sponsored by advertisers or invested in by venture capitalists and people like that. And this is true to an extent. But if we take a look at the top 10 grossing movies in the last year, are any of them crowdfunded? If we take a look at the top 10 songs on a radio station, or the world top 10, the US top 10, how many of those songs are crowdfunded? There's still a lot of money being invested by the centralized corporations and stuff, people who own the money. And that's going to be a problem going forward, because these people have the money. So for you to get the money, generally that would require some sort of venture capitalist from one of those systems to go ahead and hand the money over to you. As opposed to people who are continually getting poorer crowdfunding it. Because if you take a look at the type of people who are, by and large, consuming people's content like that, a lot of them are actually not on that. They're not in corporations and stuff. They're not making the money. They're not CEOs and what have you. So they're continually losing money in that sense. If you take a look at where all the money's going, all the money gets funneled up to the top to these few corporations, especially in the technology field. And I'm just wondering how they're going to get the money out of there unless they have some sort of venture capitalist style fund that those people eventually start seeing the value in investing in these smaller independent projects and then start putting money into it themselves. And then that becomes very interesting, because then what kind of creative control do they have over those people? If you have invested over 50% of your money into a project, you can have a disproportionate amount of say in that project versus the patrons or the Kickstarter, the crowdfunders who are all pledging $5 or $10. So then we get back into the situation of, well, who is the message actually being controlled by, right? So I think that we probably are seeing more independent. It's much easier for a single person to reach a broad audience than it ever has been in any time in previous history. But I don't think that there's any evidence pointing towards the decline of popular corporation entertainment or corporation-made entertainment, be it in music, be it in movies, be it in games. Sure, there are games that have popped up that have been independent, but take a look at where they go. Take a look at what happened to Minecraft. That's no longer independent. It's owned by Microsoft. Microsoft is a huge corporation, and they can change the message to be whatever they want, to be honest. And people can move away from it, but it has such an established presence in the market at this point that is it realistic to expect it to have that kind of impact that you seem to think that it has? Those are just a couple of thoughts that I got from watching the beginning of Dr. Layman's video. Obviously, he covers a lot of topics, so I might actually break this down into more parts. But otherwise, I'll thank you very much for watching.